All right, I'm going to switch topics. Yes, we're going to switch topics and yeah, here we go. We're going to talk about Jen Psaki and the stairs. So this is another Joe Biden story. Boy, you know, this is, he's in a sense, he's the gift that keeps giving. Jen Psaki refused to deny. So you all saw that piece of Joe Biden trying to climb the stairs and falling not once, not twice, but 3 times, right? Pardon me, I'm drinking my tea. Jen Psaki, of course, is having press conferences, and she is the master of not answering questions. But here's what's amazing. She refused to deny on Monday that Joe Biden saw a doctor after falling 3 times on the stairs as he boarded Air Force One last week. She said this, he's 100% fine. And that was in response to a question of whether he was doing okay. Okay, great. And then she said, I don't know if you've been up those steps. They're a little tricky sometimes, but he's doing great. Okay. Yeah, whatever. They're tricky. Sure. Then she was asked point blank, did Biden see a doctor because of his fall? And she said, I'm not aware of that being required. You're the press secretary. You ought to know these things, by the way. So that's a lie. That's denial of the truth. Of course, she's aware. Of course, she's aware. She said, there's, of course, a doctor who travels with the president, any president of the United States, but I'm not aware of it needing actual extensive medical attention. When another reporter pressed her to clarify if the answer to the question was no, she said, was it no? Well, I'm not trying to be, there's a doctor who travels with him. He was walking around, as you all saw, by the end of the day. So I'm trying to be completely transparent. Lie. He's absolutely fine, as he was on Friday, was this weekend. He spent the weekend at Camp David. Diffusion, distraction. She's clearly not telling the truth. And that is, in its sense, quite telling. Oh, I forgot that I do have the video of this. Let's take a look at it, shall we? I think we shall. Here we go.
I don't know if you've been up those steps. They're a little tricky sometimes, but he's doing great.
I've not been up those. Did he see a doctor? Do you have to see a doctor over it?
I'm not aware of that being required. There's, of course, a doctor who travels with the president, any president of the United States, but I'm not aware of it needing actual extensive medical attention.
Extensive.
On the border, of course.
Was it no? Well, I'm not trying to be, there's a doctor who travels with him. He was walking around, as you all saw, by the end of the day. So I'm just trying to be completely transparent. He's absolutely fine. As he was on Friday, was this weekend, he spent the weekend at Camp David.
Okay. So I just want to point out that she's lying. And you can tell she's lying because she's not answering the questions and she's evading the questions and extensive medical attention. She qualified her answer. And then here's a little secret. When somebody denies something of which they are not accused, it's often because they're guilty. And she said, I'm not trying to evade the question, meaning she's trying to evade the question. So that's all I'll say about that. All right. And by the way, I wish Biden well. I hope he does well. I hope he continues to be the president. I fear the day that Kamala Harris somehow gets more control. She is a disaster. And does not belong in where she is. It's quite frightening that she is one step away from the presidency, and we have a president who clearly is ailing. And if for no other proof that this was his first press conference in 65 days, and we are apparently still in the middle of a pandemic that requires mandated lockdowns and face masks and everything else. And this was his first press conference. When you compare that to the former president, who held a press conference almost every day for so long, and then weekly, yeah, I think that it's evident that that Biden is struggling. He actually went so far as to say President Harris and I the other day. President Harris and I. What do our adversaries on the world stage think of this president? What you have to consider that. We are at an enormous disadvantage because two reasons. One, he hates the United States of America. He just took our national symbol and cast it in the same light as the most racist legal system. Well, maybe not the most racist legal system, but as a pejorative. Our national symbol he used as a pejorative. So we have a president who's ready to throw America under the bus. And he's ailing. And he's tripping and falling. And he certainly isn't. And by the way, his press conference was like a snooze fest because he kept having these, as Tucker Carlson put it, I think, he had these pregnant pauses, but he was like a woman in the third trimester carrying quintuplets or quadruplets or something like that. So what's the hope here? Here's the thing. If you want, if you need brain surgery, you're going to impose a meritocracy on the candidates to perform the brain surgery. You're going to want the very best brain surgeon. If you are going through some legal action, you're going to screen the lawyers that you talk to and try to get the very best lawyer who can perform and make your case the strongest case in a court of law so that you don't lose. And when we are in negotiations with foreign countries, we want the best negotiator we can possibly get to represent the United States of America so we don't lose. And here we have Biden and his team. I don't know. Okay. In Colorado, the Ruger did it, apparently. So this is always, the big irony with these shootings, which are terrible, terrible things. Granted, nobody wants to, well, nobody on the right, certainly, no conservative wants to see mass shootings. And yet, every time we have a mass shooting, the left rubs its hands together and says, yay, we can do more, And in fact, somebody pointed out to me the other day, and I don't subscribe to this, but I thought this was fairly interesting. Isn't it odd that whenever we have legislation, gun control legislation, sort of being considered, there is a mass shooting, there is an event. Now, there are a couple different ways to answer that. Sometimes the mass shooting events are covered really well, like really closely with a lot of fanfare. Sometimes they're covered less well. Sometimes they're hyped a lot, sometimes they're not. And so we only see the ones that are hyped because those are the ones that get to us, right? Those are the loud ones, but there are the quiet ones that don't get hyped. So to this person, I said, okay, That's an interesting, correlation. Correlation doesn't, what is the phrase? Coincidence doesn't equal correlation, something like that. So they might be coincidental, but they're not necessarily correlated. But the other thing is, it's perhaps because the media is high on the legislation that they are hyping these events more so because of the legislation, and not because there's some nefarious player out there who's instigating some kind of action that would then, push the legislation. I don't believe that. That's ridiculous. But this is by Ann Corcoran, who is a blogger. She's done amazing work in a couple of different fields. This time, her blog is about the nefarious characters that we have invited into this country. She says it looks like in less than his first 100 days, Biden has an Islamic terrorist attack on his hands, but you will likely never hear those words uttered. Just a nut with a gun, move along, nothing to see. Of course, the week ago, this nut with a gun was a white guy perpetrating a hate crime against Asians, right? But this week, it's a new American. That's her term for refugees, new Americans, because that's the euphemism that the left is using. He's a Syrian Muslim. His innocent victims are all white. In fact, I was going to put the photo up, but I just decided not to. They're all white, redheads, freckled white people. Like, not all of them, but they're all white. And you likely won't see the phrase hate crime, even though clearly, if you can make the one correlation that it was a hate crime against Asians, you could certainly make the correlation that this was a hate crime against white people. And you won't see that outside of conservative media. The Syrian immigrant, just a nut who went over the edge. He was driven there by Islamophobic America. That's the narrative that we began to see. And initially the narrative was he was a white guy, which, by the way, like, I hate those terms. I find them so incredibly racist. Let's talk about his belief system, but we don't have to talk about skin color, except that the left insists on talking about skin color. And so then we are sort of boxed in, if you will. The Syrian immigrant is, no, she's arguing that they may go one step further to blame it on pent up Trump hatred. So she cites a story at CBS about the slaughter, quoting Biden's reaction, which was, "We got them now, go for their guns and it will take their minds off the invasion at the southern border." That seems to be an odd sort of, I'm not sure if this copied properly or whatever. Oh, here it is. At the White House, President Biden, this is the article. President Biden said another city has been scarred by gun violence. He called on Congress to pass gun control measures. The caption was just a summary of that. I just can't imagine what the families are feeling. The victims whose futures were stolen from them, from their families, from their loved ones, who now, it's misprinted, who now have to struggle to go on and try to make sense of what's happened. Well, agreed. Although I don't see what that has to do with gun legislation. Pregnant pause there. Maybe he was a pro-Trump anti-masker? Of course, before the shooter was identified by police, this is according to Eddie Scari, liberals had been very eager to draw conclusions about him. They were 100% sure he was white, maybe an anti-masker, probably a Trump supporter, right? All of these things. He says, I'm serious. Liberal journalist Kurt Eichenwald mused on Twitter that the details might reveal that the shooting, which left 10 people dead, was an episode of anti-masker violence. Can you imagine? And then Mina Harris, who is Vice President Kamala Harris's niece, tweeted immediately after the shooting that, quote, "Violent white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country. That's a lie from the pit of hell, and they really ought to stop doing that. She should be taken down from Twitter." No. See, that's the problem. She should be, if we had a level playing field, but actually, no. the other people who have been taken down for lesser offenses ought to be reinstated. But will that happen? Probably not. All right. I'm going to pause for a moment, take a cup of tea, a sip of my tea, and then we will get into some more.